What would you do if the person you loved most became the one who hurt you the deepest? My name is Eleanor Walsh, and I never imagined I'd find myself fighting not only for my dignity, but also for my freedom. This isn't an easy story to share, but if you're watching, please stay with me. I used to believe that growing older would bring a quiet kind of wisdom. Afternoons spent with tea, birds in the backyard, maybe finally finishing a few books. What I never expected was that aging would feel like being erased, little by little, through choices made by others. My name is Eleanor Walsh. I'm years old, and until a few months ago, I lived alone in the home my husband Richard and I built together in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. Every flower in the front yard held a memory. The kitchen still carried the scent of his coffee. I wasn't ready to leave. I didn't want to leave. I had slipped on a throw rug in the living room, not badly hurt. Just a few bruises. I was still alert, walking, still myself. But that one fall was all my son Daniel needed. The next morning, he arrived early, his eyes cold and distant, a look I couldn't quite understand. Without asking how I was, he came in carrying a briefcase, speaking in sharp, clipped sentences. "Mom, we found a great facility. It's time. It's best for everyone." I laughed, thinking it was a joke, but Daniel didn't laugh. "I'm not going anywhere," I told him. "I'm fine. This is my home." But the arrangements had already been made. My things were packed, the paperwork signed. I stood in the hallway, watching two strangers come to move my boxes. My chest tightened, and I struggled to breathe. It wasn't happening. I tried to argue, to resist, but the look in Daniel's eyes, as if I were a burden to manage, stopped the words from coming. "You fell," he said. "You could have broken your hip. You live alone. It's too risky. Frankly, I don't have time to keep checking in on you." He didn't speak with cruelty, but with cold efficiency, which somehow made it worse. They took me away in a van. I wasn't even allowed to ride in Daniel's car. I remember the deep, heavy silence settling into my bones as we pulled away from the only life I knew. The facility was clean, modern, with large windows and walls painted in soft neutrals. But it carried a faint smell of bleach and something else I can only describe as abandonment, a silence that words can't fully capture unless you've lived it. I remember sitting on the edge of the new bed in the room they gave me. My name was on a label stuck to the door, like I was a package or a misplaced item someone had decided to store away. I waited for Daniel to say something, maybe an apology or some reassurance, but all he said was, "I'll check in later this week. Don't worry, Mom. You'll be comfortable here." Then he left without another word. I didn't cry immediately. I just sat there, looking around. The walls were bare, and all my belongings had been reduced to a single suitcase. The home I'd filled with memories now existed only in my mind. I wasn't old enough to forget, but I was old enough to be forgotten. That night, lying in a bed that wasn't mine, I listened to the soft hum of fluorescent lights in the hallway. I thought about Richard and how we used to laugh at the idea of growing old apart, how we promised to always take care of one another. Now, he was gone, and my son had put me away like I was nothing. But I wasn't nothing. Not yet. Something inside me stirred that night, a small spark I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was the start of a quiet defiance. They thought I was finished, but they had no idea what I was about to do. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, planning everything. The next morning, I woke to the sound of soft wheels rolling down the hallway. Medication carts, I'd later realize. along with the occasional shuffle of feet. It was a place where even time seemed medicated. My door was slightly open, and from the room next to mine, I could hear someone coughing. The scent of scrambled eggs mixed with over-brewed coffee floated into the room. I dressed slowly, each movement a reminder that I still had some control left. When I stepped into the hallway, the staff greeted me with polite nods and tight smiles. Not warmth or familiarity, just routine. I had become part of the scenery. The common area was filled with soft murmurs and the background noise of a television. No one looked up or asked my name. Some stared blankly at game shows, while others dozed off with untouched plastic cups of juice beside them. I stood there, invisible even though I was right in front of them. I settled in a corner by the window. The sky was gray, and outside a squirrel hopped along the fence, pausing to peer inside. For a moment, I envied that squirrel, free to roam wherever it wanted without paperwork or permission. Daniel didn't call that day or the next. It wasn't until the fourth day that he showed up, his shirt tucked in neatly, like he had come straight from work, which, knowing him, was probably true. He sat down across from me in the lounge, avoiding eye contact. "I brought your insurance documents," he said, handing me a stack I hadn't asked for, "and a few photos for your nightstand." There were 3 pictures, one of him as a child, one of Richard holding Daniel as a baby, and one from a family vacation where I was cropped out like an afterthought. I looked at them quietly. "Is there anything you need?" he asked, his voice carrying that tone people use when they want to seem kind but hope you say no. I wanted to ask him why. Why this? Why now? Why couldn't he just check in on me from time to time like a decent son? But I already knew his answer. This was easier. So I said nothing. "You're quiet," he observed. "I'm thinking," I replied. He looked uneasy, as if even that small bit of resistance unsettled him. Then he said something I'll never forget. "It's not that I don't care, Mom, but you've had your time. Now let me handle things." Had my time? As if life had an expiration date, as if I had nothing left to live for or offer or feel. He left after 10 minutes. No hug, no, "I love you." Just walked out like it was a completed task. The week that followed passed in a blur. Meals served at strict times, bingo games with prizes that meant nothing. I tried to smile at the other residents, but most were lost in their own silence. Some were too far gone to even recall their own names. That's when I realized the cruelest part of this place wasn't the boredom. It was the erasure. They didn't just take away your independence, they took away your identity. No one here knew I had once been a librarian, that I played piano for Richard every Sunday morning, that I baked pies from scratch, or that I'd read every Steinbeck novel twice. To them, I was just a room number, a fall risk, another old woman whose time had passed. Then one afternoon, a nurse I hadn't seen before came in, carrying a clipboard and wearing a gentle smile. Her hair was pulled back, her scrubs spotless, but her eyes were tired in a way only someone who's carried too much for too long could understand. "Mrs. Walsh?" she asked. "Hi, I'm Marissa. I'll be checking in on you this week." I nodded. She sat down closer than most staff usually did and asked, "Is there anything you want me to know about you?" It was such a simple question, but no one had asked me that since I arrived. I hesitated, then said, "I like crossword puzzles. I make a mean lemon meringue pie, and I still remember the smell of my husband's shaving cream." Marissa smiled. "That's good." I wanted to hear more, and just like that, something changed. She wasn't like the others. She wasn't pretending. She truly saw me. She came back the next day, and the day after that. We talked, we laughed. When the dining hall ran out of tea, she brought me some from the break room. Instead of calling me Mrs. Walsh, she called me Eleanor. She even remembered the name of my favorite singer from the 70s. She shared stories about her daughter, her mother who had Alzheimer's, and the extra shifts she worked at night. She never complained, but her voice carried a quiet weight. Gradually, she became the only reason I didn't feel completely invisible. I still missed my home. I missed Richard. And I still felt betrayed. But for the first time since being forced into this place, I wasn't just waiting to disappear. I was paying attention, watching and listening, figuring out who was truly on my side and who never had been. Somewhere in the silence, I started to understand. This wasn't just a nursing home. It was the setting for a battle I hadn't even realized I was about to face. I began to notice the little things first. The way staff knocked twice before entering. The way some residents stared off into nothing, their stories locked behind tired eyes. How people stopped asking questions once they decided you were just old. But with Marissa, it was different. She saw beyond the wrinkles, the scheduled medications, the chart on the door. She listened when I spoke. Not with pity, but with respect, as if I still mattered. Every morning, no matter how busy she was, she made time for me. She'd pop her head into my room and say, "Morning, Eleanor. You good today?" Just those few words gave my day meaning. She treated me like a person, not a case file. It had been 2 weeks since Daniel last visited. Not that I expected anything different. My phone sat silent on the nightstand. No calls, no messages, no check-ins. And yet, there I was, sharing stories with a nurse half my age, as if she were the only family I had left. Marissa's laugh was warm and genuine, the kind that caught me off guard sometimes. She told me about her little girl, Mia, who had just turned 6, who loved peanut butter sandwiches and hated going to bed. "She insists I leave the hallway light on," Marissa said one night, as we sat in the small garden behind the center. "Says it keeps the nightmares away." I smiled. "Smart girl, smarter than me most days," Marissa replied, her voice catching slightly. She looked away, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. I didn't press, but I noticed her hands, slightly calloused, nails short. Hands of someone who had to do everything herself. Later, she told me her mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 years earlier. Marissa was just 29. She'd taken on 2 jobs to pay the bills and moved her mom into her own apartment because she couldn't afford a facility. "And your husband?" I asked softly. She smiled, but it was hollow. "He walked out when I told him I wouldn't put my mom in a home. Said he wasn't ready to carry that kind of weight." That kind of weight. I understood it. I'd carried it every day since Richard passed. That night, lying in bed, I thought about her. The sacrifices, the loneliness, the way she smiled despite the world pressing down on her shoulders. And I thought about how little Daniel seemed to understand about weight, loyalty, or love. The contrast was unbearable. One morning after breakfast, I asked Marissa if she could help me find my lawyer's number. She blinked, surprised, but didn't question me. She just nodded. "Of course," she said. "I'll bring you a phone and a quiet place to make the call." I could see it in her eyes. She didn't want to intrude, but I could tell she sensed something significant was happening. It took less than 5 minutes. My lawyer, James Palmer, had been our family's attorney for years and recognized my voice immediately. I told him I needed to make changes to my will and wanted to begin the process of adult adoption. There was a brief pause. "Eleanor, are you sure?" he asked. I'd never been more certain. That very afternoon, I wrote 2 letters, one to Daniel, brief, cold, and straightforward, the other to Marissa, which I sealed and hid in the drawer of my nightstand. I wasn't ready to give it to her yet, but when the moment came, I wanted her to understand. She wasn't just my nurse anymore. She was family now. I didn't tell her that day or the next. Instead, we kept up our usual routine, chatting about books, her daughter's spelling homework, and the weather. But something inside me had shifted. I no longer felt like a passive bystander in this place. I had a purpose again, a quiet mission, a chance to rewrite my legacy. Because if Daniel thought he could determine how my story ended without consulting me, he was about to find out just how wrong he was. And I wouldn't need to raise my voice to prove it. It was early October when the leaves outside the facility turned a vivid, rusty red. One morning, I found myself staring out the window, watching the leaves fall like fragile paper memories drifting gently to the ground. The stillness reminded me of how my life had been quietly slipping away, unnoticed by everyone except Marissa. That day, she brought me a cup of chamomile tea. Real chamomile, not the powdered kind. She'd picked it up at a discount store on her way to work. "I thought of you," she said. "Smells like something you'd enjoy." And it did. It reminded me of my old kitchen, Sunday mornings with Richard reading the newspaper while I baked cinnamon rolls. We sat together by the window, quietly watching the trees. She looked more tired than usual, but still radiated that soft, steady calm that was uniquely hers. That was Marissa's magic. No matter what chaos filled her own life, she made you feel like you were the most important person in the world during those moments. She told me her daughter Mia had gotten sick the night before, a fever and sore throat. She'd stayed up all night comforting her, rubbing her back, giving her water, holding her tiny hand. "It's nothing serious, just a virus," she said. But I could hear the strain in her voice, the exhaustion, and the quiet fear that comes when you're shouldering everything alone. I asked, "Do you ever get a break?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'll rest when she's grown. Right now she needs me." Something clicked inside me then. A quiet understanding, a silent confirmation of all I'd been feeling. It wasn't just admiration, it was recognition. I saw myself in her, the younger me who had once cradled Daniel through countless sleepless nights, the woman who gave up weekends, vacations, and career opportunities for her family. The difference? I did all that and ended up in a place like this, but Marissa deserved better. Later that day, I called James, my lawyer, again. I finalized the amendment to my will. Half of my estate, including the house, savings, and remaining investments, would be left to Marissa Carter. No fanfare, no announcements, just a quiet, legal commitment. For the first time since Richard passed, I felt like I was doing something meaningful again. In the days that followed, I kept a journal. A real one, leather-bound, with pages that carried the scent of old bookstores. I wrote letters to Marissa, to Mia, and even one to myself. I poured everything into those pages. My memories, regrets, and the sting of betrayal still ringing from Daniel's voice when he said, "You've had your time." Each word felt like stitching a wound closed. One evening, I invited Marissa to join me in the garden behind the facility. The air was cool, the sun sinking low behind the trees. I offered her the seat beside me and handed her a small envelope. She blinked in surprise. "What's this?" she asked. "Not for now," I replied. "For when it matters." She looked at me intently, really looked. "You're not sick, are you?" she asked. I laughed softly. "No, dear. I'm just awake now." We sat in silence after that, our shoulders nearly touching. I don't think she fully grasped the weight of what had just happened, that I had quietly rewritten my legacy, not from anger, but from clarity. Sometimes, the people who share your blood aren't the ones who carry your heart. As the light faded and the first stars appeared in the sky, I made peace with something important. If Daniel had given me up, then I had every right to give myself to someone who truly saw me, who valued me, who stayed. I didn't know then how quickly things would unravel, but I sensed it. A storm was coming, and I was finally ready to stand in the rain. It was well past midnight when I woke to muffled voices down the hallway. Most nights, the facility fell into a deep silence after lights out, residents tucked away like forgotten books on dusty shelves. But this night was different. I slipped out of bed, wrapped a shawl around my shoulders, and cracked the door just enough to see the softly lit hallway. At the far end, near the administrator's office, I saw Daniel. I froze. He was supposed to be out of town and hadn't visited in weeks. Yet there he stood, tense, speaking sharply to a man in a gray suit I didn't recognize. Their voices were low, but one phrase drifted down the hall like smoke. "If she changes that will, I lose everything." I stepped back into the shadows. The lawyer, because that's who the other man had to be, sighed. "It's her legal right, Daniel. You can't stop her from doing it." "She's not thinking clearly," Daniel snapped. "She's alone, confused, probably being manipulated by some staff member." My blood ran cold. He was talking about Marissa. "I want a psychological evaluation. Something official," he insisted. "If she's declared incompetent, the will can't be changed." I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded so loudly I feared they might hear it. "I'm not going to let her hand over my inheritance to some nurse," he hissed. "She owes me, owes him." He truly believed that my life, savings, and home belonged to him by default, that he was entitled to everything simply because of biology. Then the lawyer asked, "Are you sure you want to go down this road?" Daniel's answer was immediate. "Do it." I backed quietly into my room, closed the door gently, and sat on the edge of the bed, trembling. I wasn't sure what stung more, the words I'd heard or the fact that deep down I wasn't surprised. Daniel had always been calculating and strategic, but now the truth was clear. He didn't care about my well-being. He cared about control, and that's when it struck me. I'd always wondered about the night Richard died. It happened so suddenly. He'd been working late in his office, going over financial records while I was visiting a friend. When I got home, he was already gone. They said it was a heart attack. No one was there to help. But no. I remembered asking Daniel if he'd spoken to his father that day. He said no, but now I wasn't so sure. The next morning, I acted as if nothing had happened. Daniel didn't know I had overheard their conversation. He gave me a thin smile, handed me a box of herbal teas I hadn't asked for, and said, "Thought you'd like these." I nodded, pretending. That afternoon, I asked one of the newer aides, a shy girl named Hannah, if she could find out who had been working the front desk that night. She hesitated before whispering, "It was Kristen, but she doesn't say much." I found Kristen folding laundry in the back hallway. Waiting until no one else was around, I said, "I need to ask you something off the record." She looked up, startled. "You saw my son here last night, didn't you?" Kristen paused, then slowly nodded. "And he wasn't visiting me, was he?" She swallowed hard. Number he was in the office for a long time, arguing. Did you hear anything? Her voice dropped. Only a little. Something about paperwork and declaring someone unfit. I thanked her and walked away, the weight of it pressing on me like lead. Back in my room, I stared at the photo Daniel had left weeks ago, one of him as a boy, smiling in his little league uniform. The child I raised, the boy I held through thunderstorms, the teenager I forgave for lying about his grades, the man I defended even when Richard warned me he was growing selfish and cold. I had loved him unconditionally, but now I realized that love had always been one-sided. Then, like a film running backwards, memories flooded in sharp and fast. Richard's phone call that day, the way Daniel arrived late at the hospital, his eyes dry, showing no urgency, the silence that followed. Had he really? I didn't want to finish the thought, but I already knew the answer. He hadn't helped his father, not because he couldn't, but because he didn't want to. He let Richard die to avoid dealing with the financial consequences of the company's debt. The debt Daniel had helped create. And now, he was coming for me. But I wasn't Richard, and I wasn't going to disappear quietly. I reached into my drawer and pulled out the envelope I'd written for Marissa. It was time to give it to her because war had been declared, and I had no intention of losing. Things moved faster than I ever expected. One moment, I was sitting in the garden with Marissa, watching leaves drift across the path like whispers from another life. The next, I was told to pack my things again. But this time, I wasn't being moved to another room or wing. I was being transferred to a psychiatric unit. The nurse who delivered the news was new, polite but mechanical, as if reciting from a script. Mrs. Walsh, the attending physician, has recommended a transfer for observation, a few days just to ensure your safety. Safety from what? I asked. She blinked. There have been concerns about confusion, unusual conversations, possible signs of delusion. I let out a short, sharp laugh. You mean me realizing my son's a vulture? She didn't respond. About 10 minutes later, 2 orderlies arrived with a wheelchair. I told them I didn't need it, but they insisted it was standard procedure. I didn't resist. Not because I agreed, but because I knew pushing back would only reinforce the lie. If I raised my voice, they'd label me irrational. If I refused to cooperate, they'd use it as proof. Staying calm was the only option. They rolled me down a corridor I'd never seen before, through a locked door with a security code I didn't have. The moment it shut behind me, something inside me broke. The atmosphere was different, sterile, heavier. The walls were a dull green that felt more like a prison than a hospital. No photos, no music, just the low hum of hopelessness. My new room was smaller. The bed was bolted to the floor. There was one window with safety glass. No sharp objects, no phone, no Marissa. I asked the nurse, a woman with weary eyes and a tight bun, how long I'd be there. Until the evaluation is complete, she said. Who ordered it? I pressed. She hesitated just long enough to confirm what I already suspected. Your son requested it, she finally said, citing support from Dr. Levon. Dr. Levon, the facility's medical director, a man I'd only spoken to briefly a few times and never trusted. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, trying to smother the fire rising in my chest. So this was Daniel's next move. He couldn't overturn the will himself, but if I was declared mentally unfit, legally incompetent, then everything I'd fought to protect could be undone. I'd be silenced, locked away. That first night in the room was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep and barely moved. The lights outside my door stayed on all night, shining through the gap like a spotlight. They brought me pills. I refused them. They tried to persuade me, saying I needed rest, that I was agitated. I wasn't agitated. I was fully aware. I thought of Richard, how he must have felt, alone in that office, clutching his chest and dialing the one person he thought would save him. And I thought of Daniel, staring at the phone and choosing not to answer. That night, I cried, not out of fear, but because I realized how little I mattered to him. I wasn't his mother anymore. I was an obstacle. Then I remembered Marissa, her hands, her laugh, her promise. And I knew she wouldn't let this slide. The next day, a social worker named Kevin came in, young, clipboard in hand, soft-spoken. "I'm here to talk, Mrs. Walsh. Just routine questions." I cut him off. "Don't waste your breath. You're not here for me. You're here to validate paperwork." He blinked, surprised. "That's not true." I said, "Then let me make a call?" He hesitated. "That's not allowed without physician approval." I stared at him. So much for rights. He left about 15 minutes later, visibly shaken. I hadn't given him the breakdown they wanted. No ranting or crying, just calm, cold truth. They wanted me to break. I gave them composure instead. Later that evening, while pretending to nap, I overheard voices outside my door. "She's lucid," one nurse whispered. "Honestly, more coherent than half the staff." "Orders are orders," the other replied. I felt a flicker of hope. Not everyone was blind. Still, I was trapped, and time was slipping away. But I knew Marissa, and I knew something Daniel didn't. He'd underestimated me. He had no idea what I'd taught her. The first time Marissa tried to see me after they moved me, they turned her away. She told me that later. She had rushed in during her shift, still wearing her scrubs, her badge swinging as she moved, her heart probably racing harder than she'd ever admit. She asked the front desk nurse where I had been transferred, only to be met with silence. "Mrs. Walsh is no longer under your care," they told her. The issue was being handled internally. She told me her hands started trembling. She felt like screaming but held back. She knew better. Marissa was smart. She understood the game they were playing, even if she didn't yet realize how far Daniel's influence reached. But she began digging. She was no longer just a nurse. She had become determined. She called James Palmer, the lawyer I had been working with, demanding a meeting. When he hesitated, she sent him a letter I had written weeks earlier and carefully hidden away, like a seed I hoped would sprout when the time was right. That letter changed everything. James called her back within the hour and met with her the next morning in his office. According to Marissa, she wasted no time with small talk. She told him everything: the change in my will, Daniel's mounting pressure, and how I was suddenly labeled unstable out of nowhere. She also brought a crucial piece of evidence: a voice recording. 2 weeks prior, during a casual conversation in the hallway near the nurses' station, Daniel was speaking to the facility's administrator. Unaware, he didn't realize Marissa had her phone in her coat pocket and had accidentally pressed record while reaching for a pen. His voice was clear in the recording. He said plainly, "She's just lonely, easy to manipulate. That nurse is conning her. Once I have her declared unfit, the will goes back to the way it should be." That audio was enough to raise serious concerns. But Marissa didn't stop there. She tracked down Kristen, the night shift nurse who had seen Daniel at the facility after hours. Kristen was hesitant at first, afraid of losing her job. But Marissa told her the truth. If she stayed silent, she'd be complicit in something far worse than neglect. Kristen agreed to sign a statement. Next came the medical records. Marissa noticed discrepancies in the evaluation ordered by Dr. Levon. Dates didn't match. Statements attributed to me that I never made. Medications I was supposedly refusing, even though I had never once refused any prescriptions before the psychiatric transfer. She gathered everything, the statements, recordings, medical inconsistencies, and took them to James. Together they filed for an emergency hearing with a judge, labeling the situation what it truly was: elder abuse. Meanwhile, I was still locked inside that wing, pacing my small room like a caged animal. Every day they brought pills. Every day I refused to take them. My chart was filled with words like uncooperative and defensive, as if I were being difficult just for the sake of it. But I knew the truth. They wanted me numb, quiet, gone. I had no idea what Marissa was doing. I couldn't see it or feel it. But I believed in her. She was the only person in that place who ever looked me in the eye and saw me as a human being, not a patient, not a burden, not a bank account. When they finally told me a hearing had been scheduled with a judge, I knew she had found a way through. That morning, they let me shower, gave me clean clothes, and offered me a cup of coffee I didn't trust. A nurse came in to brush my hair, trying to make me look presentable, but I didn't care about appearances. I was getting ready for battle. I wasn't going into that courtroom as a victim. I was going in with nothing left to lose and everything to say. They transported me in a van with tinted windows, like I was some kind of criminal. 2 orderlies sat up front, chatting about their lunch plans, while I sat silently in the back, hands folded, pretending not to listen. But I heard everything. The way they referred to me as the old lady with the nurse problem, joking that I must be faking it for attention. I memorized every word, knowing soon their words would count. The courthouse wasn't far. A small gray building with a broken flag and too many empty parking spots. I was led through a side entrance away from the public eye, as if I were something shameful. But inside that courtroom, I saw her, Marissa. She sat near the front, wearing a simple navy blouse, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she caught my eye, her expression overflowed with emotion. She didn't speak, just nodded, silently saying, "I told you I'd come." Then I saw Daniel sitting with his lawyer, smug, his suit too perfect, his posture rehearsed. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He thought he'd already won. The judge was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense tone. She looked at me like she hadn't decided yet, and that gave me hope. James stood and began, laying out the facts slowly and carefully, like a scalpel, not a hammer. He presented Marissa's audio recording, Kristen's statement, the inconsistencies in my medical records. Then he played the tape. Daniel's voice filled the room, cold, calculated, cruel. She's just lonely, easy to manipulate. That nurse is conning her. Once I have her declared unfit, the will goes back to the way it should be. The courtroom fell silent. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, but it was too late. The words hung heavy in the air, staining everything. Then it was my turn. I stood slowly. My knees trembled, but my voice stayed steady. "I may be old," I said, "but I am not confused. I am not senile, and I am not finished." I looked directly at Daniel. "I trusted you. I loved you. I forgave you for things I shouldn't have. When you allowed your father to die, ignoring his pleas for help just to avoid facing your own mistakes, you crossed a boundary I cannot and will not forgive." Gasps filled the room. Daniel's face drained of color. I pressed on. "This isn't about money or the will. It's about dignity, being recognized, being heard, being treated like a human being. And if my own son values me only as a dollar sign, then I'd rather spend whatever time I have left with someone who sees that I matter. Marissa's eyes brimmed with tears, and she quietly reached for a tissue. The judge called for a break. When we resumed, her tone was strong and unwavering. Mrs. Walsh is mentally competent and fully capable of making decisions. This court finds the guardianship petition brought by Mr. Daniel Walsh to be without merit and frankly troubling. She looked at Daniel and said, "You should consider yourself fortunate that she is not pursuing criminal charges." Just like that, I was free. Free from the confinement, free from the silence, free from the son who had abandoned all that was good and honorable. Outside the courthouse, Marissa embraced me, not tightly, but just enough. "You did it," she whispered. "No," I replied. "We did." But deep down, I knew the true fight was only beginning, because although the law had cleared my name, I still had a long way to go to restore my legacy. The morning after the hearing, I stood before the mirror in my old room, the real one in the facility. Same beige walls, the small window letting in slivers of morning light, and the photo of Richard and me tucked away in the corner of the vanity. But something was different. I was different. They had tried to break me. Daniel tried to erase me, yet I was still here. Marissa came in just before breakfast, carrying a tray with pancakes and fresh strawberries, my favorite. She said nothing at first, simply set the tray down and pulled up a chair. Her eyes showed fatigue, but her smile was bright. "Victory pancakes," she said. I laughed. We earned them. That day, the staff treated me with a bit more respect. Some avoided eye contact, especially those who had followed orders without question. Others quietly apologized, nervous and uncertain. I held no grudges, but I remembered everything. Daniel, however, disappeared. He didn't call, visit, or even send his lawyer to handle the aftermath. It was as if he slipped into the shadows, hoping the storm would pass. But I wasn't finished with him. That same week, I completed the adoption papers with James. Marissa Carter became my daughter, officially, legally, in court, and in my heart. The process was surprisingly straightforward. The judge asked if this was truly what I wanted. "Yes," I said, without hesitation. Because family isn't defined by DNA, it's about who stands by you when you're broken. Family is about who stands by you when everyone else walks away. Daniel learned about the adoption the Monday after. He sent me a single-line email. "You'll regret this." I deleted it without a second thought. His anger wasn't about the money I gave Marissa. It was about the love. In the days that followed, I felt lighter. I spent more time outside, laughed more often, and helped Marissa organize Mia's birthday party, an outdoor celebration with balloons, cupcakes, and paper crowns. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I came across an old scarf Richard had given me. Holding it to my cheek, I closed my eyes, recalling his voice and quiet strength. "I hope I made you proud," I whispered. In that moment, something inside me finally settled, something restless for far too long. But the calm didn't last. One morning, James called with news. Daniel was attempting to challenge the will again. This time, he claimed undue influence and had hired a new legal team, aiming to overturn everything. Of course he did. A snake never changes. It just sheds its skin. But this time, I was prepared. We had recordings, witnesses, medical evidence of my mental clarity, legal guardianship of my estate, and now the adoption. He couldn't touch a single dollar without unraveling the entire web he'd woven. Still, anxiety crept back in. No matter how strong I felt, part of me still ached. He was my son, my baby once, and now he was the antagonist in my story. That night, Marissa and I sat in the garden, watching the sun slip beneath the trees, casting long golden shadows on the grass. Mia chased fireflies, her laughter filling the air like music. I wish I could say, "I don't care," I said softly. But I do. I still care. Marissa didn't reply right away, but took my hand, warm and steady. "You don't have to stop caring," she said. "You just have to stop letting him hurt you." She was right. I would always love the little boy Daniel once was, but I wouldn't mourn the man he had become. I had a new chapter ahead, with a new family to share it with. The final battle was approaching, and when it came, I would be ready to close the book. The courtroom felt colder this time, whether because of the tension or because I knew exactly what Daniel was after again. He wasn't simply contesting the will. He wanted to erase everything I had done, every step I had taken to protect my name, my dignity, and the one person who stood by me when everyone else vanished. Marissa sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, now my legal daughter. Her hands were steady, but her shoulders tensed, ready to defend like a soldier. Daniel, dressed in another expensive suit, didn't even glance my way. His new, polished, arrogant lawyer painted a picture of manipulation, that Marissa preyed on an elderly woman, that I'd been coerced, that none of my decisions were trustworthy. They played the age card, the vulnerable senior card, but they overlooked one crucial fact. I was still here, alive, present, and powerful. I stood when called, my voice steady and strong. I made every choice fully aware of what I was doing, I told the judge, looking her straight in the eye, and I stand by those decisions. I revised my will not out of confusion, but out of clarity. I decided to leave my legacy to someone who truly earned it, not someone who assumed it was his right. The opposing attorney sneered, "And what about your son? Are you saying he deserves nothing?" I didn't flinch. "I'm saying he deserves exactly what he gave me in my final years: silence, distance, and disregard." A hush spread through the courtroom. Then James, my lawyer, took the floor. He presented the adoption papers, legal, complete, airtight. He detailed Marissa's years of dedicated service, her spotless record, and unwavering loyalty. He reminded the court of Daniel's previous attempt to have me committed, and then he played the audio recording again. Daniel's smug, unfiltered voice plotting to manipulate the system to reclaim the will. The judge leaned back, folded her arms, and sighed. "I've seen many ugly family disputes," she said, "but this is different. It's calculated cruelty disguised as concern." She faced Daniel. "Mr. Walsh, not only is your petition denied, but I am referring your conduct to the State Bar Association for review. If emotional damages were recognized here, you would owe your mother far more than money." I couldn't hold back the tears, not from sadness, but relief. It was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited, but I didn't stop. Marissa and I walked hand in hand to the car. No need for statements. No need for the world to understand. We understood each other. Back at the facility, I packed my belongings for the last time, not in secret or fear, but with joy. We were moving to a small house just outside town, a modest cottage with a backyard and a garden I could care for again. Marissa called it ours. Mia had already chosen where her swing set would go. As I zipped up the last suitcase, I looked around the room that once felt like a prison. Now it was just a space, a chapter that had served its purpose. Before leaving, I tucked the old photo of Richard and me into my bag. I looked at his smiling face and whispered, I kept my promise. I didn't let him take everything. Outside, Marissa gently honked from the car. I took one last look, then closed the door behind me. And just like that, I stepped out. Not defeated, but reborn. Not forgotten, but chosen. The sun warmed my face as we pulled into the driveway of our new home. It wasn't grand or fancy, just a simple cottage with pale blue shutters and a porch swing already creaking in the breeze. But to me, it felt like a palace, because this time I chose it. No one forced me here or packed my things without asking. I came on my own terms, bringing with me the people who had truly stayed. Marissa helped me out of the car while Mia ran ahead, laughing as she claimed her bedroom. Daisies bloomed in the front yard. I smiled, knowing Richard would have loved this place. I hadn't heard a word from Daniel since the ruling. No calls, no emails, nothing. Part of me waited for a final plea or apology, but none came, and that silence said more than any words ever could. We unpacked slowly, savoring each moment. I placed Richard's photo on the mantel. Marissa hung Mia's school drawings, the kitchen filled with scents, cinnamon, basil, fresh bread. Life returned to my bones in ways I hadn't realized I still needed. A week later, a letter arrived, not from Daniel, but from his lawyer. It was a formal notice. Daniel had filed for bankruptcy. Apparently, his reputation suffered after the court hearing. His real estate ventures were collapsing, investors pulling out. Word had spread. You can't hide a heart like his forever. And just like that, the man who tried to take everything from me lost it all himself. I didn't smile when I read the news. I didn't gloat. But I did breathe deeply, fully for the first time in years. Because justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it simply watches your enemy fall without you having to lift a finger. One afternoon, I sat on the back porch with Marissa. The air carried the scent of fresh grass and warm earth. She was reading while I crocheted something for Mia's room. Do you ever regret it? She asked softly. Giving me so much? I looked up, surprised. I didn't give you anything, I replied. You earned every bit of it. Her eyes filled with tears as she looked down. No one had ever said that to me before. I reached out and took her hand gently. Well, get used to it, I smiled. You're stuck with me now. That night, I dreamed of Richard. We were dancing slowly and playfully in the living room like old times. He wore those silly plaid slippers, and I could feel his hand resting on my waist as if he'd never gone. When I woke, birds were singing outside, sunlight streamed through the curtains, and Mia's laughter floated from her room. Then it hit me. This was home. Not the building, not the furniture or bricks, but the feeling, the calm, the joy, the love. I had found my family, not by blood, but in those who chose to stay. Daniel had lost a fortune, but I had gained a future. There was no amount of money I'd trade for this. The garden basked in golden afternoon light. Sunbeams spilled over the fresh soil where Mia and I had just planted wildflower seeds. Her small hands were dirt-smudged, her face messy, but her laughter, pure and free, still danced on the breeze. I sat on the porch swing, a glass of lemonade in hand, watching her chase nothing in particular with her little butterfly net. Nearby stood Marissa, barefoot in the grass, smiling, her hair tied back and sleeves rolled up. She looked younger lately, lighter, as if some invisible burden had lifted. This was peace. This was healing. This was everything I had once been denied and everything I had built from the fragments left behind. For so long, I believed growing old meant losing pieces of yourself, becoming invisible, I never imagined I'd have to fight for my name, my worth, my voice. But I did, and I won. Not with anger or revenge, but with truth, grace, and clarity. After the ruling, Daniel never contacted me again. No apologies, no explanations, just silence. And I let it remain that way. There's a quiet, slow mourning when you let go of someone you once loved unconditionally. It's private, but necessary. I don't hate him or wish him pain. I simply refuse to let him define me any longer. Instead, I poured my energy into planting, baking, teaching Mia how to make her first peach cobbler, and helping Marissa upgrade her nursing certification so she could start a small private care service at home. We became more than just a household. We became a true family, not connected by blood, but by shared struggles, loyalty, and love in its purest form. Every morning, I choose this life, not because it's perfect, but because it's mine, and I fought to have it. I once thought my story ended the day Daniel wheeled me into that facility. I was wrong. That was only the beginning of my final chapter, the one I get to write, with my hands in the soil, laughter around me, and peace in my heart. As the sun dipped lower, I picked a single sunflower from the pot beside me. My favorite. Richard once told me sunflowers always turn toward the light. Now I understand what he meant. Because even after everything, the betrayal, the silence, the isolation, I found the light again. I let it find me, and I followed it home. Blood may have left me, but love saved me.